portion of the tutorial, we're going to take the basic mesh that we created using the volume builder, volume mesher, and remesher in the last tutorial, and we are going to go ahead and start sculpting it. So if you have anything else in your scene, I suggest getting rid of it. Obviously, we want to keep our eyes, right? So we can put those eyes back in those sockets. And we'll probably be adjusting those at some point. But this remesh here, we don't need. So we're just going to delete that. You should obviously have this saved, and if you were actually making a horse head, you'd be doing a lot more work making sure things were correct and accurate. Okay, so we've got our remesh. Let's go ahead and we can turn our eyes on as well so that we can actually see what we're doing with the objects that are in those sockets. And once we've done that, let's go ahead and change from, I've been doing this in the standard view, let's go ahead and change to Sculpt. Once we change to Sculpt, things look fairly different. So first you'll note that there's this Sculpting Layers manager here, but our attributes are the same. There's some other stuff down here that we don't need to worry about now, but right, it's basically similar things. This actually is like our structure, all the points that we have. And then our object manager, right, what we're used to seeing is actually here. It's just underneath the sculpting layers. And if you look over here, there's a whole bunch of tools we haven't seen before. These are all the Sculpt tools, which is pretty awesome, and we'll get to using those very shortly. There's a couple options up here. There's this link size, link strength, and link stencil. That means that, like, say I use the draw tool, although probably not. Let's say I use the inflate tool and the amplify tool. I can link it so that my brush size is the same size and my brush strength is the same size or the same intensity. So, right, I don't have to be changing these things on every tool. Like if I get something that's working and I'm going to be using a bunch of tools together, I may want that same intensity. And so that's why those things exist. Other than that, we want to be in model mode. We're not doing this in points, polygons, or whatever mode. And now we just need to figure out how do we actually start sculpting this. Now, because this is a mesh, we can actually use any of the sculpt tools on our mesh already. We don't even need to put it in sculpt mode, right? We could start to actually sculpt this thing without adding any additional layers. We can just use the tools as a way to work. Now, if I rotate around, you'll see that I wasn't doing that with symmetry on, right? I want to make sure I turn that off. One of the things that if you are working with Sculpt, that's really useful is having symmetry on. If I go to the settings, you'll note that we could show the planes. We don't necessarily need to in this case, but we can also, where is it? Oh, the context where it says auto. There's modeling or sculpting, right? We could say we're in sculpting mode, but it probably is going to figure that out because we're using sculpting tools, and pretty soon we'll have a sculpt tag on this object, right? So now it should, you can see like both sides of the face are now changing shape, right, based on this, right, how I have this set. Pretty cool, huh? I mean, this could easily turn into like a dragon or demon or, you know, something very unhorse-like very quickly if we wanted it to. Okay. So instead of doing this just on this mesh, though, although sometimes that's all you need to do, you don't necessarily need to sculpt it. We are going to do that because we're trying to learn the sculpt tools. And so to turn this into a sculptable object, the very first step we have to do is we have to come over here and we have to hover over this square of squares, which basically is subdivide. If I click on this, it's going to create this object that just says base object, level 0, strength is 100%. Right? Now, one of the things that I wish the interface did a little bit differently and made it harder to do is that typically you don't want to be sculpting on your base object. You only want to be sculpting on layers that are attached to that base object. And so The next thing that we need to do is we need to create a new layer that's at level 0. So we have something we can mess with that's at this density without messing with this base object. Because what's nice is we can always go back to this base object and to work on other things or whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and this plus symbol here, this is add a layer. So we're going to add a layer. And I've added this one layer. You'll note that I currently have that layer selected. It's at level 0. And levels is just how many subdivisions, right? We haven't added any subdivisions yet, so we're still at level 0. If I double click on the name, I can rename it. I'm not going to worry about it right now. But I want you to note that I can't add any more subdivisions when I'm on a layer. I have to switch back to being on the base object. And then I can subdivide this again. And I want you to see that there is this gear. If I click on the gear, I can maybe make some changes. Right now, that's all grayed out. So I'm just going to cancel that. And I'm just going to click subdivide. Now, when I do that, you'll see that this mesh has now been subdivided. I've got twice as many polygons, more or less, or exponentially more polygons. I also want you to note that we're starting to see a polygon count up here and how much RAM this is taking to use, right? Right now, we only have about 10,000 polygons. Not too shabby. And so we have this set to base level 1. Now, if I go ahead and create a new layer, you'll see that now I have, right, this layer 2 that is at level 1, that's at the same level as this. And note that I can't even select the other layer right now. And the reason for that is you can only select you can only work on whatever layer your base object is currently set to in terms of level. So if I select the base object again, you'll see that now I've got this slider that I can use. And if I drop this back down to 0, then suddenly I can manipulate my layer 1, but all right, I can rename layer 2, but I can't actually select it and do anything to it, right? And so let's go ahead and go up a couple more layers from our base object. So I'm going to go back to my base object. I am going to go ahead and crank this up to level 1. You'll note as soon as I get this back to level 1, this button is available again. I can click. I can create, right? Now I've got this base object as level 2. You can see how fine this mesh is getting. I'm going to go ahead and hit a plus on that as well. And so now I have 3 layers. And you'll see on this third layer, I now have like 40,000 polygons. I just want you to see what happens if we go a little bit further up. So if I go ahead and say, oh, let's go to 3, right? Now I'm starting to take up more memory, and you'll see it does grow exponentially. Something else to note is there's a point at which I highly suggest turning off the visibility of the lines, right? One, because it takes a lot more RAM and GPU strength and everything to render all those lines. And 2, once you get to a certain number of lines, like if I even go up one more level, things start to get pretty black, right? You can't see what you're doing any longer. And so you get to a point where you're like, all right, I'm just going to say display garage shading. Right, and I will see this shaded model, but I am not going to be seeing any additional things on this. So I'm going to go ahead and make a layer for, we didn't do 3, so I'm going to drop down to 3. I'm going to go ahead and say new layer. I'm going to go back to my base object, go up to 4, and do a new layer. All right, so now I have a layer for every different subdivision. Let's go ahead and let's lock our base object, right? We can still adjust the number of levels here, but that means that we're not going to be able to accidentally use our brush on the base object, right? It's locked. I shouldn't be able to make any changes. I'm clicking and dragging, nothing's happening, which is exactly as I want it. So let's go down and start with our very base layer 1, and we're going to select that. And I'm going to rotate the view. This is where you make big changes, right? And so with each layer, you're going to get to a point where you can't make the fine changes you need to make anymore, right? And so the goal is that you work at the lowest level possible until you get to a point where you're like, ooh, I need a crease in here, and there's no way I can actually do a crease without making it look like trash on the level I'm currently on, and I need to go up one. So to start with, we're going to start with let's go ahead and start with the inflate tool. All of these tools do slightly different things. We'll use wax here in a little bit to actually build up a little bit more flesh on the cheeks and make this not such a flat edge. But the first thing I want to do is I want to actually use inflate to give us a little bit more to work with up here, like on the brow and where the eyes are going to be. So I have this selected, and my current settings, it's persists from the last time you used the program. So I have it set to 30 is the size, and strength is 20%. This happens to be pretty good as it currently stands. I do have symmetry on. That should still be on. And there's only a couple other settings in here we really need to talk about. One of those is steady stroke. And what steady stroke does is it basically takes the jitter out of your stroke. So if I was to just click and drag, you can see there's a little line there. And basically that's saying that anything between where I'm currently drawing and and the end of that line is going to be smoothed, right? Any jitter and shakiness of my hand is going to be gone. It's really great when you're using like a trackpad like I am right now. If I make the length significantly longer, right, and I click and drag, you'll see that that line goes a lot longer, right? And so that could be really useful too. I'm actually really happy with how that just turned out on that. And I may go ahead and leave that setting there, and let's see if we can get a little bit more inflated there. And maybe we'll just start here and just see if we can build up a little bit here on the head. And you can see that like already I'm getting, a fairly good result, but you'll also see that, right, with that, if I was trying to inflate here around the eye, I'm not really having the best luck there because this length is too far. So I'm going to drop that down to about 17. And I'm just going to start filling in kind of the space around this eye socket and kind of inflate that a little bit up. And so you can already start to see how useful this modeling technique can be. All right. Let's go ahead and go down to the nostrils as well. There's typically, right, a little bit more thickness here. The nose is like a little bit more pronounced. And again, I'm just very slowly, right, adding dimension to these things. Now, one of the cool things about inflate, and I'm actually going to take my length down to 0 for this, is that, and most of these tools, they do two things. So you'll see I've got inflate here, and down here I have, it's not flatten, which one is it? Smooth? It's either smooth or scrape, I can't remember. They're opposites. But basically what you can do is you can hold down, is it Control? Yeah, you can hold down Control and the tool will do the opposite of what you were actually just doing. So like, let's say I want these nostrils to kind of push in deeper, and maybe I need my brush size to be a little bit smaller too. That's better. So if I hold Control and click, I can actually sort of do the inverse of that inflation. And so I can make, right, these nostrils more pronounced by pushing, right, the model back a little bit deeper. Right, these tools are really handy, right? Sculpting is, I think it's a lot of fun. I'm not super great at it, but I do think it's a lot of fun. Now, I do want you to note that, right, as I'm doing this, I'm starting to get these like edges and facets. That's kind of hinting to me that I'm reaching the edge of what's possible with this level, right? So again, I just want to go through this and make some additional changes. We're going to use one more tool, and then we'll go ahead and go to some of the other tools. So let's go ahead and use wax. And wax, I'm going to go ahead and move the size up. Now, if you use the opening and closing bracket symbols on your keyboard, you can actually just, click to make the brush size bigger. And what wax does is it sort of adds, I don't know how to describe it. You can kind of see what it's doing now. It's like adding more height to the mesh, but it does it in like a flat-ish sort of way, right? Whereas inflate's more of a rounding. This is definitely, right, a little bit more of a filling in, kind of like a bulk fill on the surface. And you can kind of see it, it's doing weird things around the edges there. And it's not really, it's actually kind of that's interesting. It's actually, instead of building those surfaces, it's cutting those away, which is kind of what I wanted to do. So I'm just going to keep working on this a little bit. We're just going to go ahead and maybe taper this in just a little bit more. And you can see the strength right now, my size is 47, the strength is 50, so it's pretty intensely strong. It might be something where I might even, I don't know if I want to, I'm afraid of doing it here. What I really want to do is I want to cut into that surface a little bit and push some of this deeper down, right? Because usually there's like a little bit more going on there. So let's look at one of the other tools, right? So this is flat, or this is smooth. Where's flatten? Here's flatten. Let's see what flatten does. If I come in here and I just click and drag, right, that's a pretty flat surface, so it's not really doing a whole lot there. If I was to do it up here where I've done the eye, you're going to see that it's just going to smush it back out flat, right? That's not exactly what I want to do. It may be that wax inverted, maybe if I hold control. Yeah, you can kind of see it's tapering, right, a little bit on the insides there. That's kind of nice. This part of the nose is probably a little bit too strong, so I might want to use wax to kind of come in here and just soften that up a little bit. Okay. And then, right, so you can see that these tools are really pretty powerful. Now, I do have a lot of roughness on the back of this head. One of the great tools that's available to us is smooth, which is right here. If I take this and I make this a little bit larger, and I just want the strength's 100%. If I click on this right now, it's going to do a lot of work. Right, that's something that I want you to note, is that it's usually you don't want to use 100% strength. I have found that really it's sort of like you just have to figure out, like, okay, where's that magic point where I can get the control that I need without, going too crazy. Okay, so I've started to smooth some of this out. And you'll see, right, I don't have anything crazy happening here. I just am running kind of out of ways to do this. Let's see if I can get that a little bit smooth too. There we go. Okay. Now, the other thing is there is probably a little bit of a, horses tend to have like a little bit more of a hollow here between their eyes. And so I'm going to go ahead and maybe I'll use wax and see what happens if I invert it, if I hold control and click and just sort of pull a little bit here and just keep going. There we go. And let's rotate the view a little bit. Yeah, you can kind of see that a touch. I might do just a little bit more in through there. And I'm trying to leave, right, like a little area here that's actually built up. Right, because they tend to have that like flattish part of their head as well. Okay, so we're kind of getting there, right? We're definitely getting something that looks like an animal head. Oh, one other last thing we probably want to start at this level is let's go ahead and create enough space for there to be a mouth here, right? So I'm going to go ahead and grab my inflate tool again, and I'm going to hold down control. I'm going to click and drag, and I'm just going to try and push up and back into the mouth to make more of a void. Right, so control, let's just keep going. We'll just see if we can push this back. You can see I'm kind of getting to the edge of what's going to be possible at this level, but that's fine. Right, and again, as we're doing this, right, it's big changes is what we're trying to focus on. Right, we will do smaller changes. We'll maybe give this thing a tongue at some point. And I might actually increase the strength and the size at this point. So I'm going to set my strength up to 40%, my size up to 33. I'm going to hold down control. I'm just going to see if that's, oh, there we go. That's going to do a lot better work for us. Okay, so I've just pushed that back some. I'm going to rotate my view. I rotate my view a lot doing this because it makes, like, otherwise it's really hard to see what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and push this down a touch too. Eventually I'm going to add a tongue back in here. It could be a separate object, or it could be, you know, the same object. I do want to make sure I have enough of a jaw here for teeth to go in, and maybe a gum bed. So I'm going to go ahead and use wax again. And this time I'm going to make my size a lot smaller. I'm going to leave the strength there. But what I can do is I can come in here and I can say, let's see here, let's see if that, well, that's actually rounding it some. That's might actually be useful. Let's go ahead and use inflate instead. And again, strength is 40. Let's make the size smaller though. And so now I can come in and I can just try and get, there we go, right? Just get that a little bit thicker. Do the same thing over here. Okay. So now one of the other tools that we've got here is, where is it? Oh, is knife. So what knife does is it cuts. It basically makes a crease. You can imagine, like, if you had a knife in clay, right? Oops. You can create a crease. And so I'm trying to push, right, the lips back just a little bit there and create that crease. There is also amplify. So if I use amplify, which is right here, what amplify does is it basically, it's like, it's almost like it's like applying contrast, where you're applying contrast to the shape, right? So you're basically amplifying deviations in the surface, right? So if I was to come over here, and you can kind of see where, right, there's this edge here. If I pull amplify on there, you're going to see that that edge actually looks a little bit harder when I'm done. And that's because it is amplifying those changes. It's pretty subtle at the settings I've got it at, but then it can go really crazy as well. But we're just going to go ahead and see if we can amplify some of this as well. Give this horse a much nicer jawline. And something else with horses, right? They tend to have a cut in here. So let's do our, let's go ahead and do inflate. And we're going to do this opposite. We're going to hold down control and maybe start like up here and just sweep in and say, that's too much. Let's make the size 30, but let's make our strength 25. And I'm going to go ahead and actually add some length to this steady stroke. And I'm going to hold down control. I'm going to click and drag again. There we go. Right, we've got a little bit of a cutaway there in the horse's jawline. Okay. Let's go ahead and save this. And so we've done some base modeling. So now let's go ahead and push this up a little bit. But before we do that, let's just look at our lines. Right, so one of the things you need to be careful of, especially as we get to the finer details, is you don't want the mesh folding back in on itself, right? Like one of the problems with the knife tool is if you use it, especially at a high strength, like I'm using it right now, if I click and do this, I can very easily get to a situation where the mesh gets really warped and also potentially folds back on itself. Right? That looks hilarious. We're not going to keep that. But I was trying to crank it hard so it would fold over. And that can cause really weird texturing issues when you get further down the line. Let's go ahead and instead, let's switch to a different level. So again, we're going to go back to our base object. Let's go up to level 1, which if I just click somewhere on here, close to however many, right, I have what, 4 or 5 subdivisions right now. I just want to like say, because right, that's close to 2. I can click over here. That's close to 1, closest to 1. Okay, so I've got that. Now let's go ahead and let's use our inflate tool some more. And we're going to go ahead and try and inflate our eye around our eyes just a little bit more. You can kind of see what I'd really like is for this to fill in a touch more here, because I'd really like there to be like for the kind of the eye to go there, and I really need this to be a lot more bulked up too. Let's go ahead. We really want to sink right these eyes in there, and they might be just be too far out as well right now, so let's go ahead and just bring this up, and let's go ahead and switch to our object view, grab the sphere that's our eye, hit the letter E, and let's just see if we can, if we scoot these in just a little bit more. There we go. I think that gives us a much better potential result. So let's go ahead and switch back to our remesh. Note when I'm on the sphere, everything's grayed out because I can't sculpt that. Also note this is the sculpt tag that lets us know that this object is an object that's undergoing sculpting. So I'm going to go ahead and inflate some of this again. And I might need to fix some other things, but I'm intentionally kind of going a little bit crazy with this right now. If I wanted to use the smooth tool, which is down here, right, I could smooth this out. That's a lot of intense smoothing, so let's go ahead and dial that pressure down a little bit, right? But I could smooth things out a touch here. I could check up here and see how that's all going. It looks all right. I do know that, right, horse eye sockets kind of fill in here, or like get cut down a little bit there. So let's go ahead and start with a knife. Oftentimes use, and we're going to do steady stroke, 11. The strength is insane, right? But I'll kind of show you what it's going to do. So if I come here and I'm like, oh, I know the horse eye, right, kind of sticks out. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of pushing into that mesh, and that doesn't look so great. So I could either undo that and adjust the size, or, right, this is where, right, the smooth tool, selecting the smooth tool again, can really, is another way that I can come back in and fine tune, right, what I've just done to this poor horse's head, right? It's kind of looking like a horse and a crocodile put together at this point, which is making me happy in a strange way. And so I'm going to go ahead and maybe smooth this even some more, maybe increase the strength of my smooth, and just see if we can just really soften that back up. Right, so I've got a little bit more shape to the head. I feel like all of this is, right, bulked up too much at this point. But again, this is a test. We're just going to go ahead and do this. The back of the head does still look a little bit boxy. I really am happy with that jawline though. Although down here at the muzzle, it's not quite, there's not quite as much detail as I would like. I'd like it to be a little bit, maybe a little bit firmer edge. If I look back at our references, I don't know, it's pretty smooth actually. You can see there is, like, depending on whose rendering of a horse there is a little bit of, like, jowl and like stuff that sticks out the sides there. So let's go ahead and maybe we can at least inflate around where the lips are going to be a touch. So I'm going to use my inflate, and I'm going to come through here, and I'm just going to kind of, right, push this out. Now we know we're going to come back in and we're going to actually cut in some of this as well, but I'm just trying to create that kind of that shape a little bit more, and that looks pretty effective. Now I could cut in here, or I could at least start to try and use the amplify feature. So if I click on amplify and I come in here, you can see how I'm getting a lot more shadowing there, right? Because that has amplified that, and I could probably make this a little bit more firm here. That's kind of nice. All right, if I wanted this to have a stronger jawline, I can always use amplify to harden those corners a little bit. Similarly, I can come in here and do just a little bit more work to make this a little bit stronger if I wanted to. Okay. All right, so then let's go ahead and use our knife tool, but this time we're going to set our strength substantially lower and set our size a little bit lower too. And we're just going to go ahead and try and cut through here, right? And just start to make that a little bit more like, right, like the horse's smile. Now I've gone way too far. So really I just want to kind of come up, and they kind of curl a little bit, but this horse's mouth is open too. Again, I told you this was going to be terrible, but it's all right. Okay, let's look at their noses, right? If you look at horses' noses, they actually do have like, you know, ridged parts and little cut ends and, you know, a lot more detail there, and their lips are a little bit more pronounced than this. So we can go ahead and let's look at that again. Let's see what happens if we just do a little bit of a cut here, right? And then maybe we do a little cut here to just give a little bit more of a pronounced lip to our horse. Okay, that's kind of working, right? So you can see, like, I could probably do some work with either wax or whatever, so I can maybe, oof, that's a lot, but that actually is going to work. Let's go ahead and drop our strength down some. And that floor plane is really driving me crazy right now. But if we come in here, right, and we look at the nose here, right, there's a lot more bulk in this section, and it kind of curls up and over. So let's see if we can start to bulk this out a little bit here. You can see it's actually thinning the end. I love wax. It's interesting. It's not what I wanted to have happen. Let's go ahead and use inflate instead. This is something where, right, I try tools until they seem to work the way that I want them to. And so if we're using that one horse as a reference, right, I can bulk that up a fair amount. It looks like it's a little bit too inflated here on this top surface, but we can take care of that in a second. I can use my knife again, and I could try and cut back into here a little bit more to create more of that shape, right? And you can see even with some of the faults on this, let's see what wax does here. It might flatten it out a little bit. There we go. And I might even be able to use wax to just, there we go, make that a little bit more shapely. But right, you can see that I'm really starting to get a fair amount of detail on this horse, right? Sculpting is, in my opinion, a lot of fun. I don't do it as much as I would like, but it's pretty great. Okay, so we've done a lot of like some of the base stuff. I really just want to jump ahead to getting to more of the detail, right? So, because then you can go back and you can just keep sculpting the night away. So I'm going to use a knife tool because right around eyes, we usually have like really hard corners at different places, like here and here. And so I'm going to go ahead and use the knife tool. I'm going to start trying to cut some of those seams in this eye, and I'm trying to figure out exactly where this is supposed to go. It's a little bit messy in there. I'm going to go ahead and hide my eyes real quick and maybe smooth some of this a little bit before I go in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab my smooth tool. And this is all stuff that the more you use these tools, the more you learn like early signs that things are going to be really going in a not in the direction you would like them to go. Specifically when geometry starts to get really stretched around itself, that's when things kind of get a little bit more problematic. Okay, so I've got that set. Let's go ahead. That's a little bit smoother. The eye should look a little nicer in there. Yes, it does. We're going to hide that eye again, though, so we can do this better. I'm going to use the knife. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to, right, start to cut this crease a little bit. Now, as I said, we don't want this to fold in on itself too much. That's probably about as far as I can go on this level in terms of, right, eye detail. Okay. So we've got some basic eye details, but if I really want some more creasing and shape in there, And some other things I'm going to want to make some adjustments to that. Now, I would say that, right, these are probably still too puffy. I might want to use wax and see if I can just flatten that out just a little bit. And maybe, well, that's going to actually grow that some. Let's maybe use smooth here and just very, like a smaller, just smooth some of that bottom edge just a little bit. And we might even want to use wax to bulk out more of the cheek here. Again, you would want to be looking at reference images, looking at musculature and all of that in order to do this in a better way than I have. But you get the idea at this point. Okay, so we've got those layers. So let's go ahead and make sure our sculpting layers are back up. And let's see what happens when we start to increase our level of detail. So we're going to say we're on our base object level 1. We could pop up to level 2. This would allow us to have more freedom in some of these details. So if I was to rotate back to my face, let's go down to the mouth. And let's say that, right, I want there to be a more strong designation here between, you know, lips and gums. I can go to my cut tool and I can come in here and I can just start cutting. What the heck? Let's change that down. Let's increase our strength a little bit. Let's see what happens here. Oh, why am I not getting anything working, right? Nothing's happening right now because I'm on my base object, which I've locked. And what I need to do is I need to select layer 3. Then, and I'm going to increase this length again, I should be able to come in here and yes, right? I can make cuts. I can do all sorts of things with this. Fantastic. I'm going to reduce the size on this brush to 10. And I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to go ahead and make an edge here, right? Which is going to, right, give me some division between lips and what could either be a gum bed or teeth, right? And then in the mouth, I'm going to want kind of the same thing to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and cut in here as well and see if I can get a little bit more, a little bit stronger separation between those objects, and I can, right? This is some of the incredible power of these tools, right? Now with this lip, maybe I want this to go a little bit deeper. Maybe I don't want the lip to be that pronounced, right? Or maybe I just need to come in here and inflate the ends a bit, but also I probably need to, right, go ahead and do the same thing to the other part of the jaw. So let's go ahead and cut in here to create that separation of the lip and what would be potentially the gum bed. All right, and now I'm upside down here, and maybe we do a little inflation, although this is huge. So again, right, you can see I'm starting to decrease the size of my brushes in order to accommodate the smaller detail that I'm working on. All right, so oh boy, we're all the way upside down now. There we go. Turn around, turn around, turn around. There we go. All right. All right, so you can kind of see that I'm having a pretty good result, getting something that looks like teeth. Or again, maybe it's the gums and I'm actually going to create and model teeth and place them into the gums at some point. Something else, let's see here, I'm on inflate. Maybe I do now want to see if I can go a little bit deeper in the detail here, right? But that's going to be like way too much, way too much. I've dropped this way down to like just a tiny percentage, and you can see it's still having a pretty large impact on that. So I may leave that alone for the time being. However, I might want a little bit more detail in there, so maybe I'll use amplify and just see if I can get this to feel like it's sunken in just a little bit more. Maybe that's a little bit harder of an edge there. And maybe we can use the knife tool up here to just cut a little bit right? A little bit more. Cut through there. Maybe this gets a little bit sharper down there. And again, I have this very finely set right now. Okay. If we come up to the eyes, we can, again, have maybe a bit more control. But still, if I wanted to, say, do like, you know, fine creases coming out of the eyes, you can see that this is just, that mesh is a little bit too, isn't going to work out for me if I was to do that. So I'm going to undo those. I might add one more here, just a tiny little something there to give it a bit more detail. And, you know, with the knife, I don't know if the knife's the right tool for this. Right, that's going to be too hard on this mesh. What I may want to do is I could, I guess, expand the size in this case, make it really big but really gentle. There we go. Right, and I can get just like a little bit more definition, and maybe continue that on up on the other side of the head. But that was even a lot, so maybe I do just 2%. There we go. And that might be, again, too much. But one of the beautiful things is we can always change it. Okay. So I hope you're starting to get the idea. Let's go ahead and boost up to one of our much higher levels. So I'm going to go back to my base object. This time I'm going to turn display garage shading lines off. So it's just garage shading. And I'm going to go ahead and just blast all the way to level 4. So I'm going to grab layer 5. Now this is where we can start to really make some fine-tuned differences on our models, right? So here where I have this kind of big crease, what I really want is I want these to be much smaller and finer creases that kind of come out of that socket. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to decrease this size substantially, and I'm going to go ahead and start to make some creases. And I want you to see, right, how fine, and I'm not doing anything that's remotely anatomically accurate. I am just trying to show a little bit like the level of detail you can start to get on the surface of your model. I'm going to leave that there. That was not intentional, but you know what? It looks all right. Right, and so now I can come in here and I could say, oh, well, this really should, right, trail off this way. You know, depending on how I have the eyelids set up here, maybe I need to do a little cut around here to start differentiating somewhere here. Maybe this actually needs to be a bigger cut. Let's undo both of those. Let's increase this to 10%. And let's turn our eyeball back on so we can actually see. Okay, so maybe if I was to say, oh, I'm going to cut right along here. And you can see that's not quite awesome, but you get the idea, right? It's something where this, I might be right at the, you can kind of tell by that like tarrying aliasing, that I'm sort of right at the edge with this. And I might see if I can inflate. Now you'll see this is inflating everything, and that's way too big and too much. So I might decrease this and decrease that size a little bit more and just run it along here, right, to fill in that a little bit. And I might hold down Control and get rid of that bit that I just did there. I might also want to use the smooth setting on this, right, because this is all looking pretty rough, but I don't want it to be that big, and I probably don't need it to be that powerful. All right, so you can kind of see where I'm getting some smoothing action on this. It might make sense to flatten this. I don't know. We'll see what that does. Ooh, that's a lot, right? That's a lot of pressure. Oh, and it's set to 100%, of course. That's why it's doing such a bad job. The brush size is pretty big, but actually flatten kind of, I think it kind of helped. And so you get, right, you get the idea. We're starting to get things that are a bit more Now, one of the other things that horses often have, and I'm jumping kind of ahead here into more fine detail, is, right, oftentimes they'll have like a vein that like runs down their face and splits and things like that. The inflate tool is pretty great for doing veins, especially if you have a reasonable length on your steady stroke setting, right? And I don't know where this vein is going to come from. We're just going to draw it here. And you can see at this level, right, I can get something that's pretty, right, vein-like. Now, it's a little bit sloppy, and it's actually a little bit jagged. Let's see here if I can make this if I increase that strength just a tiny bit, and maybe increase the size just a tiny bit. Right, you can see that I can get this set here. Okay. We're not going to worry about stamping or stencils or anything at this point. We're just really going to be focusing on some of the brushes that we can use. Okay, so I've got that set. Now this is where maybe I would want to, I don't know, maybe I'd want to use smooth to see if I can like kind of soften some of the lumpiness there. Or because they're veins and they're not always perfect, maybe I actually want to use amplify to crank up some of these settings. Let's just see what happens if I amplify it a little bit. Right, so you can kind of see that these veins are now, right, starting at a place, they're amplifying, they're going back in. I might come in here and use this to just click a few times, and I can't really see what I'm doing through that grid, but you can see, right, if I click a few times in here, I can kind of even out some of those areas where it's not quite perfect. And I may, flatten's probably too much, but I could drop it down and drop this down and just see if we can, that actually looks like it might work in that setting just to smooth things just a touch. Okay. So, right, I can start to, you can see we can start to get really a lot finer detail. One of the things that we haven't talked about that we're going to hold off on, and this is when I might actually want like a little bit more of a cut. Again, that's a little bit much. Maybe I just need to dust this down to 3%. That looks so terrible, but I guess it does. It shows the point. But yeah, so you can see we can continue to come in here and refine and cut and get to finer and finer detail, depending on what we need. So I'm going to leave this at this point because I feel like this has been a really pretty solid introduction to the tools. At least a couple of them. I would highly suggest you look through and experiment with these. There's a lot of things we haven't talked about yet, one of which is masking, where you can actually say don't manipulate this area so you can have control over certain things. So if I wanted this horse to have like a big wart on its cheek, if I select the mask, I can come in here and I can paint this like gray, right, paint on here. And then I could, let's go ahead and see if we can make this a little bit smaller. Okay. And then if I was to say use inflate, oh, and if I was to make, let's make my brush bigger. Let's make it, yeah, that's pretty huge. And we'll increase the strength a lot, right? So you can see now, right, I've got this inflation. I'm just going to keep inflating it for a little bit just so it's really obvious and disgusting. Right, so I've got this lesion on his cheek where the only place that was being changed was the area that wasn't painted in gray, right? So if I was to continue over here, right, I can rotate this around and, right, we then have like a really kind of terrifying horse where something bad is happening to his face. We're not 100% sure what it is, but it's something terrible, right? So then with the mask, you can invert the mask, right? So then I could come in here and maybe only do something specific inside that zone. I can also like clear the mask. I can actually hide or show the masked areas, which is kind of crazy that I can just show these little patches on the sides of his cheeks. That can be really useful for certain things. I'm going to say, oh, let's see here. Let's just say show masked. There we go. Okay, it's all there. And then I'm just going to go ahead and I could just clear the mask, but I'm just going to hit undo a few times because I don't really want his cheeks looking like that. And yeah, there you go. So yeah, so you can mask things. So sometimes like that might be good for a vein or something where you need like a much harder edge in the surface of your object. Okay. And that gets us to a kind of creepy, a little bit too boxy horse head. But hopefully you all are better at doing this than I am. But at this point, I just wanted to be able to show the introduction to some of the basic tools. And in a later tutorial, we will look at stamp and stencil, where you can actually, if you increase the number of subdivisions enough, you can add like, surface textures and things like that, similar to how you would displace something with a material in Redshift, but you're actually doing it to this mesh, to a layer on this mesh. Okay, that's where we're going to stop for the day.